Let's imagine that we have a couple here on my left, and we have a couple here on my right. Both of these couples now are ready to be united in marriage. Let's focus our attention first to this couple here on my left. Now look at them very, very carefully. Don't they look happy? In fact, as you look at them, you might say, well, today is the happiest day of their lives. Let's leave them for a year, though. Let's let a whole year go by, and after a whole year goes by, now let's look in on the same couple again. Kind of look through the window. Don't let them see you. Now, what do you see? Something's happened, hasn't it? You notice what's happened? They don't seem to be as close as they were last year. Kind of drifted apart a little bit. Relationship's not quite as strong as it was. Well, let's let 2 years go by, and after 2 years, now look in on them again. Well, something else has happened. They're a little further apart now than they were last year. Love they have for one another is not even as warm as it was last year. Well, let's leave them for 3 years. And after 3 years, look in on the same couple again, and now what? Well, it doesn't look good, does it? In fact, they're so far apart now that some might say that their relationship is about ready to end up on the rocks. All right, let's contrast this example of these two on my left with the two on my right here. Now take a look at them. Now they're ready to be united in marriage too. Don't they look happy? Look at them. And as you look at them, you might say, well, today is the happiest day of their lives. Look at how happy they are. All right, let's let a whole year go by, and after a whole year goes by, let's peek in on them. Now, what? Now, something's happened here too, hasn't it? But in this case, you notice they seem to be closer than they were last year. Relationship is stronger. Love for one another is a warmer type of love, a mature love. Well, let's leave them for 2 years. After 2 years, look in on them again. Now what? Well, again, that relationship has grown stronger. Love for one another warmer. After 3 years, again we look in on them. And again, that relationship grows stronger. In fact, as each year goes by, it seems that relationship grows stronger, love for one another warmer, and some might say that their wedding day was the happiest day of their lives. Now, what was the happiest day of your life? Well, it wasn't the day you got married. Some of you might not be married. But it was the day that you began a relationship, not with another man or woman, but with Jehovah God. That was the happiest, the most wonderful, and most thrilling day of your life, because you began a relationship with Jehovah God. Now, some of you maybe here this evening haven't begun that relationship. Some of you maybe are just learning about Jehovah. And you're getting to learn about Jehovah as a person. So you're getting to learn about Jehovah a little differently than people of the world. Because you ask people of the world, do you believe in God? Many of them will say, yes, I believe in God. But now see, what's the difference in the way people of the world know God and the way we do? Well, we know Jehovah as a person, don't we? What is it that allows you to know Jehovah as a person? Can you name one thing that helps you to appreciate Jehovah as a person? Name one thing. Brother Heidelberg? Please.
Jehovah's knowledge, or make a change. Our knowledge of Jehovah.
All right.
Helps us to love Jehovah, know Jehovah.
All right, fine. Now, in what way? Brother Heidelberg's comment is right. Can we pinpoint some ways? You see that we know Jehovah, so that allows us to know as a person. Please. His qualities, his marvelous qualities. That's right. And we learn that through creation, don't we? Especially, we see things in creation. Very good. What's another thing? Please, Brother Barr, is it? Barrett, okay. Right track. His purposes. All right, yes. And there are wonderful purposes. And please, Brother.
Proverbs 1:7 says, "Fear of Jehovah is good in all ways and knowledge."
Uh-huh.
So you begin to understand things like Jehovah, how it feels when a certain has a circle. You begin to have this right relationship with him. Allows you to begin to apply it and have this close relationship with him.
All right, so we've been able to pinpoint some things. The wisdom about Jehovah and knowing him. Okay, we pinpointed his marvelous qualities, wonderful purposes, and there's one other thing, too, that would help us to know Jehovah as a person. Can someone else offer a comment? See, Sister Heidelberg, please.
The record of Jehovah's dealings.
Okay, that's true. And what do we learn about that record and his dealings with God's people? We learned something there. Okay, Sister back here, please.
Loving kindness and dealing with the people.
All right. In other words, the way he does things. See, that also helps us to know Jehovah as a person, doesn't it? And, of course, the more we learn about Jehovah, his ways, his purposes, his qualities, the closer we get to Jehovah, see? But you see, when we dedicated our life to serve Jehovah God, then we learned about Jehovah as a person. And so we dedicated our life to serve him. And now some of you maybe are studying and learning about Jehovah. We encourage you to keep it up. And we hope that very soon you'll be able to enjoy this relationship with Jehovah too. But now when you began this relationship, you who have taken this step, do you remember how good you felt? You really were thrilled at the feeling. You stepped out in the water and you testified to everyone who saw you how you felt. In fact, you felt like Jesus. And you know, the psalmist tells us how Jesus felt when he presented himself to Jehovah in the 40th Psalm. If you'll notice, Psalm 40, beginning at verse 8, the psalmist tells us how Jesus would feel. Prophetically here, the psalmist foretold this, starting at verse 8. To do your will, O my God, I have delighted, and your law is within my inward parts. I have told the good news of righteousness in the big congregation. Look, my lips I do not restrain. O Jehovah, you yourself know that well. Your righteousness I have not covered over within my heart. Your faithfulness and your salvation I have declared. I had not hidden your loving kindness and your trueness in the big congregation. Now, you notice verse 8 mentions that he would delight to do his Father's will. By the way, what does that word delight mean? What do you think that word delight means? For the Heidelberg, please. All right, finds pleasure in doing it. And further, what else do you think that word delight would present? What thought, please?
When I think of delight, I think of something you really enjoy doing. You really look forward to it. It's not something that, well, you can take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm.
You really want to do it.
All right, good. Please.
You get some inner satisfaction.
Yes. Okay, good. Please, brother.
Part of light, and light, of course, contrasts with dark, and lighting up something makes you feel good, so the light, to be bright, and that's your whole life, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sister Manera, please. All right, so in other words, when you delight to do something, you do it willingly, eagerly, enthusiastically. You do it because you want to do it and you get a lot of pleasure in doing it, see? You don't do it because you have to do it. It's like if we serve Jehovah in a negative, grumbling manner, Jehovah's going to accept our worship, but how much more so if we do it willingly, eagerly, enthusiastically, because we want to do it, you see? And just imagine, there was a time when every living creature delighted to do Jehovah's will, but that was before that spirit creature allowed selfishness to rob him of his delight. But we look forward to the time when, again, every living creature will delight to do Jehovah's will. But you know, we have a fine example, in fact, an excellent example of one who delighted to do God's will. And who was that? Who's the excellent example, do you suppose, of one who delighted to do Jehovah's will? Please, brother.
Jesus Christ.
Yes, Jesus Christ. Yeah, so he delighted to do it, you know. And now why was it that Jesus, regardless of what they did to him, he could still delight to do his Father's will? And you know, they did a lot of things to Jesus, didn't they? Remember what they did? They stoned, they slapped him, they made fun of him, they spit at him. And you remember how they took that crown of thorns and forced that down on his head? Can you imagine the excruciating pain when they did that? Maybe you sisters, sometimes your husband will buy you some flowers once in a while, just to say, well, honey, I love you, and maybe buys you some roses. And maybe you take those roses and maybe you're going to put them in a vase. I guess if it's a real fancy one, we call it a vase. But maybe you're going to take one of those, you know, and you pick it up, oh, and you drop it. My, you get one of those little thorns, pricks your finger, oh, and it bleeds, and that's just a little thorn. Now, the thorns that were used on that crown of thorns in Jesus, forced on Jesus' head, were great big long ones. So can you imagine the pain, the excruciating pain, and can't you just picture the blood coming down Jesus' face when they did that? And they didn't stop there either, did they? They forced him to carry that heavy stake. Remember how they had the mock trial? And then they took great big long nails, great big long nails of spikes, and drove them through his hands, both of his feet. Can you imagine the pain? And they nailed him right to that stake. And how about the pain? Can you imagine the pain when they lifted that stake up and all the pressure on those 2 points? And then probably they took that stake and boom, knocked it down in that hole and all the pain. And finally they put Jesus to death, didn't they? But you know, he could still say that he delighted to do his Father's will. Now why? Well, it's like a marriage. You know, marriage, many times when it first starts off, it's like this one on the left. Fine, it starts off beautiful, but now what happens along the line? See, along the line, something happens. It starts off good because both of them are giving. You see, both of them are contributing. But then somewhere along the line, one stops giving, it just takes. And what do you have? You have a one-sided relationship. And is that a happy relationship? can be most miserable, you see. So with our relationship, you see, with Jehovah God, Jesus knew that in order for his relationship to be a happy one, he'd have to give, and he did, and he gave even to giving his life. See, in a marriage relationship, you wonder about your husband or your wife. What are they going to do? What are they going to give? But with Jehovah, never have to worry. He always gives. He never stops giving. All you have to worry about is old number one. See, what are you giving? What are you doing? As long as you give, it'll be a happy one. When you stop giving, you see, then it's not happy anymore. But Jesus expresses it very nicely in John chapter 4 and verse 34. John 4, verse 34. Now notice how he puts this very nicely here. John 4, verse 34. See, he says, Jesus said to them, "My food is for me to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work." See, in other words, serving Jehovah God was like food. And you know how it is. We all like to eat, don't we? I don't know what you like. Steak or chicken? What? Ham? Enchiladas. Or fettuccine. All right, but you know how it is when you enjoy eating something like that. It gives you, you not only enjoy it, but you're nourished by it, aren't you? Same thing with Jesus. See, serving Jehovah was like eating a delicious meal. He not only enjoyed it, but he was nourished by it. See, now is that the way we feel about our relationship with Jehovah God? Well, you know, it's like two people who fall in love. When two people fall in love, there's no one else like the other person. There's no one like her. She's just it, you know. No one like her. Him? Well, the sun just sets on him, you know. Well, now, because they feel that way, what happens? That relationship grows stronger, and finally they say, let's get married. See? They begin a relationship together, and they get married. All right, let's reminisce a minute or two. Let's go back to when you first heard the truth. Remember the very first time you heard it? First time you heard it. First time it clicked. Never heard anything like that before, did you? That was the most wonderful thing you ever heard. In fact, you could say right then and there that you fell in love with the truth. And that love for the truth grew stronger and stronger until finally, in the privacy of your prayer, you said to Jehovah, Jehovah, I want to dedicate my life to serve you. I delight to do your will. And you made a dedication of your life to serve Jehovah God. Now, you see, the question is, what have you done with that relationship with Jehovah? What does it look like? Does your relationship with Jehovah look like this one on the left? Maybe drifted apart? Maybe it's at the breaking point? Or is your relationship with Jehovah like this one on the right? Is that relationship stronger than it ever was? And your love for Jehovah stronger than it ever was? You see, it's very apparent that some would not appreciate that relationship with Jehovah God. And Jesus helps us to appreciate that. In Revelation chapter 2, Jesus analyzes some of the conditions in the early Christian congregation and actually conditions that exist in the congregations today. And he analyzes something very interesting in verse number 4 of Revelation chapter 2. Now let's see if these words might apply to us today. Revelation chapter 2, verse 4. Here's what he finds in the congregation at Ephesus. He says, "Nevertheless, I hold this against you." Imagine now, Jesus is saying, I hold this against you. You have left the love you had at first. See, now he was holding something against them. And he says, you left the love you had at first. All right? So now what did they lose? They lost something. What did they lose? You notice what it is? What did they lose there? What did they lose? Please. They lost their love. Which love did they lose? The first love. Now what's different about that first love? See, what about that first love? Okay, let's talk about this first love. What about this first love? What's different about it? Someone tell us something about it, please. All right, you talk so much. In fact, remember when you first heard it, how good you felt? They couldn't keep you quiet. You want to tell your mother and your father, sisters, brothers, cousins, your uncles, the people who lived across the way, people you worked with. They couldn't keep you quiet. Maybe you talk too much. It was like, Rutherford or Russell used to say that when a person first gets the truth, he ought to be put in jail for about 6 months until he cools off. But anyway, that's the way you felt, you see. You felt so good about it. All right, now the question is, do you still want to do that? See, do you still want to tell your mother and your father and your sisters and your brothers? See, or have you lost that spark? See, that's what Jesus is saying. He says, you've lost that first love. See, never do we want to lose that first love, that spark, that enthusiasm. And if we've lost it, then we want to work to get that back. You see, We don't want those words to apply to us, do we? That Jesus is going to say, I hold this against you. See, never do we want that to happen. You know, Paul gives us some good counsel in this regard. Turn to Hebrews chapter 10 and read with me verse 32. And you'll notice here a comment that Paul makes. Now, notice very carefully, Paul is not saying go back, but notice what he is saying. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 32. Hebrews 10, verse 32. Now, he says, however, keep on remembering the former days, in which after you were enlightened, you endured a great contest under sufferings. See, now, he's not saying go back, but you notice he's saying remember. See, look back. See, look at what you've done. See, look at what your relationship with God looks like now. And if you read on, you'll notice that some were persecuted. Some lost their possessions. You see, they suffered all kinds of things. Some went to prison. Well, how about us? Haven't we gone through these things when we first came in the truth? Maybe some of us had problems. How many of you, when you first came in the truth, started to learn about the truth and study, had opposition from maybe family members, your husbands or wives or children or mothers? How many of you suffered that kind of? See, how many of you? Any of you lose your work or job or had trouble on your job, maybe because of the truth? Okay, see, some even that. Any of you go to jail for the truth? Well, some of us went to jail for the truth, too. See, in other words, then, it's the same thing with us. And what Paul was saying is, all right, now look back. Look at what you did. When you came in the truth, look at what you put up with. You see, look at how you held fast. Now the question is, what does our relationship with God look like now? See, what have you done with it? See, what does it look like? Does it look like the one on the left? Does it look like the one on the right? See, have you appreciated that? And you know, when you stop and think who Jehovah is, that we have a relationship with, you know, we say God. But see, that's so easy to say God, but you ever stop and think, who is this Almighty God? You look at the stars, and He's created all of those and many more that we can't see. We think we see a star, they put a telescope on it, it's a whole island universe. Billions of stars. And we're so small, and yet Jehovah allows us to have a relationship with Him. Wonderful thing, isn't it? What are you going to do for Him? Can you give Jehovah anything? Well, you take two people who love each other, two people who are married, they love each other, they do things for each other, don't they? Maybe once in a while a husband will bring home maybe a box of candy or some flowers or a little perfume just to say, honey, I love you, I just was thinking about you, I just wanted you to have this. And if a wife loves her husband, she'll do little things for him. You know, maybe cook him something he likes or do something he likes. I always get a big bang out of when people say, well, Brother Manera, I like your tie. See, I tell them, well, my ties, I have my ties specially made. See, and then I show them the label. My wife makes my tie, see. Well, now, what are we going to do for Jehovah? Make him a tie? Going to buy him a box of candy? Some flowers? No. But you know, there is something we can do. Now, turn to Proverbs 27, and you'll see what we can do. Proverbs 27. And let's read verse 11 there. Proverbs 27, verse 11. 27, verse 11. It says, be wise, my son, and make my heart rejoice, that I may make a reply to him that is taunting me. See, that's what we can do for Jehovah. In other words, we can put Jehovah God in a position where He can answer back the one that's taunting him, Satan, and He can say, here's a man that loves me. Here's a woman that puts me first. Here's a young man. Here's a young woman who really love me, who put me first. That's what we can do, you see. We may not do the other things, but we can make Jehovah's heart glad, you see, by doing that. But it's very apparent, though, that some would not appreciate their relationship with Jehovah. And Jesus made that very clear in an illustration that He gave. It's found in Luke chapter 14. Let's turn to that. And we're going to start reading at verse 16. So we're all going to spend a few minutes there, so if you have your Bible, turn to that. And then you can follow along. Luke 14, starting at verse 16. Now let's set the matter of the record straight here. Contextually, this applies to the anointed ones, what is stated here. It's very, very apparent. It applies to the anointed ones. But what we want to do this evening is take the principles that I mentioned there and apply that to all of us. So let's look at it from that standpoint, okay? All right, we'll start reading verse 16. Jesus said to him, a certain man was spreading a grand evening meal, and he invited many. And he sent a slave out at the hour of the evening meal to say to the invited ones, come, because things are now ready. But they all in common started to beg off. The first said to him, I bought a field and need to go out and see it. I ask you, have me excused. And another said, I bought 5 yoke of cattle, and I'm going to examine them. I ask you, have me excused. Still another said, I just married a wife, and for this reason I cannot come. So the slave came up and reported these things to his master. Then the householder became wrathful and said to his slave, Go out quickly into the broadways and the lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. All right, let's just stop there for a minute and analyze what's happening here. First of all, who would it be that would spread this grand evening meal for us? Who do you suppose that would be that would spread a grand evening meal? Okay, please, Brother Russ. All right, Jehovah God would spread. In fact, he not only spreads one, but he spreads 5 every week. 5 spiritual meals. Now, maybe some of you young ones can help us. What are these 5 spiritual meals that Jehovah arranges for us? Let's see if the young ones can answer. And let the young ones answer instead of the parents through the young ones, okay? All right, let's see. Give me one. Young lady? All right, congregation book study. That's one. What's another one? Another one of these meals. Young man? The Watchtower study. Good. All right, we got 2. Got 3 more to go. What's another one? All right, young lady? Theocratic school. Good. She named it right, too, you notice? Theocratic school. What's another one? There's 3. Young man? Service meeting. All right. There's one more. What's the other? Young man? Public talk. That's right. Very good. Well, those are the 5 meals. Now the question is, when Jehovah invites us to come to these 5 spiritual meals, how do we answer Jehovah? Do we say, Jehovah, I'd like to do your will, and we come willingly, eagerly, or is it that we are like these individuals we just read about that say, well, please have me excused? And you know, sometimes when we analyze our excuses, if we're really honest, aren't they about as lame as those excuses that they gave? Those were pretty lame excuses, weren't they there? Look at that first one. He says, I bought a field and I got to go out and see it. Did you ever hear of anybody buying a piece of property and then say he's got to go out and look at it? Would you do that? Oh, I guess not. You wouldn't do that, would you? Pretty lame excuse, wouldn't you say? Do you think Jehovah could see through him? Sure. And how about the next one? The next one says, I bought 5 yoke of cattle. We wouldn't even buy a horse without looking at it. He says he bought 5 yoke of cattle. Do you think Jehovah could see through him? Sure. Kind of lame, wasn't it? And the third one, he says, I guess he didn't buy that one, did he? Okay, he says he got a wife. Okay. But, you know, if he had just married that woman, he'd be pretty proud of her, wouldn't he? He'd want to show her off. See? Do you think Jehovah could see through him? Sure. Pretty lame excuse. Think he could see through us in our lame excuses? Sure. All right, let's continue. Verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own soul, he cannot be my disciple. All right? What is Jesus saying? Does he mean that we literally have to hate these individuals? Is that what he's saying? What is he saying? Please, sister. Yes, that's what he's saying. Our relationship with Jehovah must come first. See, we have relationships with fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, but you see, our relationship with Jehovah must be number 1. What if our husband doesn't want us to be a witness? See, what if our wife doesn't want us to go from door to door? What if our children don't want us to come to the meetings? See, will we still come to the meetings? Will we still go from door to door? Will we still be one of Jehovah's Witnesses? See, that's what Jesus is saying. Our relationship with him must be number 1. Okay, let's continue now. Verse 28. For example, who of you that wants to build a tower does not first sit down and calculate the expense to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, he might lay its foundation but not be able to finish it. And all the onlookers might start to ridicule him, saying, this man started to build but was not able to finish. Well, you know, isn't that true? What if somebody in your neighborhood was going to build a house? He gets up the foundation, he runs out of money. What would you think about a man like that? Wouldn't you say, what a foolish man? Look at that. He didn't even stop to figure out how much it was going to cost him. And here he is. He just gets the foundation up, he runs out of money. What a foolish man, you'd say, see? All right. What about our relationship with Jehovah? Isn't that what Jesus is really talking about there, too? See, what he's saying is count the cost, isn't he? Didn't we count the cost? Sure, we knew what Jehovah wanted us to do, and we made a dedication of our life to serve Jehovah, and we learned about Jehovah. It wasn't a matter of Jehovah fooling us or hoodwinking us or pulling the wool over our eyes. We knew just what Jehovah wanted us to do. We knew that Jehovah would want us to study his word and study it regularly. We knew that he'd want us to study with our families, our children, to train them. See, we knew that. We knew that he'd want us to go from door to door. See, we knew that. We knew that that was all part of our relationship with God. Jehovah didn't fool us. In fact, the elders even helped us. They went over 80 questions with us in chapter 6 of the organization book so that we could count the cost, calculate the expense, you see. Now, let's go to verse 33. Thus you may be sure, none of you that does not say goodbye to all his belongings can be my disciple. Now, that's very plain. You notice what it's saying? You've got to be able to say goodbye to all of your belongings. Are you willing to do that? That's not saying we've got to do it, but what if we had to? See, what if we had to? What if you had to leave right from here with what you got on your back? Would you be willing to go? Or would you have to run home and get something out of your house? Might not make it then. See? Would you be willing to go without running back home and getting something out of the freezer or the refrigerator or maybe the stereo that you got? You know, that new one you just got, that quadraphonic deal that got 4 speakers instead of 2? Or maybe that, that recorder that makes pictures of your TV program so you don't even miss those, see? And how about the waterbed? Would you be willing to leave that? Well, you'd have a tough time carrying a waterbed. See, are you willing to go just with what you got? See, our brothers in Malawi, Mozambique, our brothers in Cuba, isn't that what they had to do? They had to pick up and leave with what they had on their backs. So would we be willing to say goodbye to anything that we have if that were called for? That's what Jesus is saying. You know, we talked about meetings. Well, one of the scriptures we're familiar with, I know, when it comes to meetings, it probably pops into your mind as quickly as I know it does mine. Hebrews chapter 10. We're all familiar with that. Let's turn to it, though. Maybe look at it maybe from a little different angle here this evening. Hebrews chapter 10. And we want to start at verse 23. 10:23. Who'd read verse 23 for us? Real good and loud here. All right, please.
Let us hold fast the public declaration of our hope without wavering, for he is faithful that comes.
All right, thank you. Now, you notice there's an expression there, public declaration. Notice that in it. What does that mean, public declaration? Let's mention there. Public declaration. What does that mean? What does that mean, public declaration? Okay, please, Sister Bunko.
In some way, we're doing it in front of others.
All right, that's true. And we're making a public declaration. Now, what does the context show where that would be done now? Context kind of tells us where we would do that. Please. Well, we do make an official declaration according to Romans chapter 10. The Bible shows the watchtower shown, and also when we're going from door to door. But look at the context there. What does that show? Where would this be that we would make this declaration? Sister, please. Okay, so it would be where then? If it's within the congregation. At the meeting. That's right. Now, what does it mean that we would make a public declaration? See, what does that mean? Yeah, that's right. So we make comments, expressions. See, we discuss issues at meetings, don't we? We talk about blood transfusion. We talk about neutrality. We talk about what would be required. Please.
Obviously, we would have to be here.
Okay, good. We'd have to be here. That's true. Please, sister. Yes, we'd have to prepare. We'd have to be here. And then when we're here, then what? Then what, Brother Ponko? Okay. And in order to do that, too, we have to be doing what? Please, give attention. It's so easy to come to the Kingdom Hall and sit down in a chair. It's another thing to stay there mentally. See, we want to come to the Kingdom Hall 2 ways. Did you get what I said? What are the 2 ways we want to come to the Kingdom Hall? Or at an assembly. What are the 2 ways? Please. Yes, you see, it's so easy to come and sit down in a Kingdom Hall. Have you ever been sitting in the audience, everybody applauds, and you wonder, you don't want to be different, so you applaud. Then you ask yourself, what am I applauding for? See, you were there physically, but mentally, you might have been in China someplace, you see. And it's so easy to do that. So we have to learn to concentrate in order to do that. Now, that applies to our young ones, too, because, you know, they come here to learn. We don't want them to come here and, well, what happens to a lot of our young ones when they come to the Kingdom Hall? What happens to a lot of them? Please.
They fall asleep.
Yeah, we don't want them to do that. Now, you know, whose fault is that? They either fall asleep or they do something else. I notice. What else have you noticed? What else? Brother Hardware? Play. Okay. So if you take toys to the meeting and you take a blanket, what are you young ones what are you going to think about? If you take toys and a blanket, see? What are you going to think about? See? So you can see what they're going to have in mind. See? They think they're going to the Kingdom Hall either to play or sleep. All right. But you know what some elders have said? They said they go to the meeting and they notice that what happens at every meeting goes on maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then there's a parade to the back of the hall. Got to go and get a drink of water, got to go to the washroom. Ever notice that? That's been a complaint of many elders. Now why? See, we've reasoned. We put our young ones down in front of a television set and they don't move a toe for 2 hours. They get mesmerized for 2 hours, don't move a toe. Come to the Kingdom Hall, got to go. Why? See? I notice here that you're doing real well. I noticed tonight there have been very few. A couple moved around, but I noticed that by far most of you stayed in your seat. And I hope you continue that. Boy, this is going to be wonderful. The meeting's going to be over and you didn't move. Now, I wonder why. What do you do here in this Kingdom Hall? Share with others. What do you do so you don't you young ones too, what do you do so you don't have to move? Or you parents, what have you done so your children don't have to get up and move around during the talk? Tell us. Share with us. What do you do? Okay, young man, what do you do? Pay attention. Good. All right, what else do you do? Sister? Okay, good. All right. All right, some even at the hall get there early enough so that they go. In fact, I remember I was a special pioneer in Connecticut years ago, and we used to have a little Janie in our Kingdom Hall. And, I could set my watch by Janie, and she'd get up and go to the, without fail, say, well, she's on time. But we did? We assigned a sister to take little Janie by the hand just before the meeting started, say, Janie, the meeting's going to start now in just a little while. Let's go to the washroom. Let's get a drink of water. And, she never had to get up. And she grew up to be a nice young lady. In fact, I saw her a couple of years ago, and she's got a couple of little Janies of her own now. But you see, it helped. All right, what else do you do? Tell us something else, please.
When they ask to go, just say no.
Okay, that takes care. All right. And what else, brother, please?
Well, sometimes it is not particularly in sometimes the family sorrow, they don't talk about it. The fact I wasn't listening to watching my sister teaching her own children.
Well, the older ones have to set the example for the others. They see what they do. That's right. You know what one sister did? She said she played Kingdom Hall or meetings with her young ones. She says the place to train them is not at the Kingdom Hall. That's too late. So what she does, she sets them down in front of the clock. And she says, now when this hand gets over here, the meeting is over. And the little ones who watch that hand, first she started off, with like 10 minutes, then 15. She got it so they can sit there a whole hour now. When they come to the Kingdom Hall, they know what to do. Yeah. Now, I noticed another thing, too, that someone else told me in another congregation, what they do. One brother was telling me, now his young ones are not old enough so that they are able to read yet. He says, but they certainly can make a mark on a piece of paper. So he gives them a piece of paper and a pencil, and he tells them, every time you hear Jehovah's name, you make a mark on that piece of paper. And then at the end, they count how many times Jehovah's name was used. See, he keeps them interested in what's happening at the meeting. So we must do the same thing. So we keep our... I have a couple interesting experiences, but I'll save those for the opening talk at the assembly. I'll save those and keep you in suspenders, as they say, till that time. All right. Now, there must have been a time that... well, let's go to verse 24 first here. Verse 24. Who read that for us, good and loud? There's another point in here, too. Please, brother. Okay, thank you. Notice the word incite there. What does that word incite mean? Can someone tell us what that word incite means? What does that mean, brother, please?
It has to do with stirring up one.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. You ever hear anyone inciting a riot? What do they do? Okay, what do they do when they incite a riot? Please, sister. Yeah. Okay, they don't just sit there and not do anything. They do something. That's right. They talk. They move around. They stimulate. They stir people up, you see. All right, now how can we incite to love and right works then, according to what is stated there? What do we need to do if we're going to do that? Okay, brother here, please. Please.
Talk about inciting to a riot. The way that a riot would do is to appeal to a certain character of the person, appeal to a certain side of people. So if we're going to incite love and fine works, and we want to appeal to that side.
Okay, and how would we do that? See, we're still talking about meetings, aren't we, Sister Manera? All right, we have to say something. See, we have to say something in order to do that. All right, now verse 25, please. Someone volunteer to read that for me, please. Brother, Ramirez? Okay, mister. Go ahead, please. All right, thank you. Now, you notice the word custom is used there. What's another word for custom? Can we get another word for custom, Sister Punko? Habit. In fact, the Revised Standard Version uses the word habit. All right, now let's put the word habit in there and tell me what was the problem back there that Paul had to counsel the brothers about. What was the problem back there? Okay, brother, please.
We find that many of them were getting used to not
So what did they have? What kind? What kind of a habit? Bad habit. There you are. See, that was the trouble. They had a bad habit. And bad habit was missing meetings. See, we all have habits. Now, maybe you never thought about meeting attendance as a habit. See, but it is. See, when it's time to go, do you get ready and go automatically, or do you kind of, have to hem and haw about it? See? Now, we all have habits, every one of us. You got habits, I got habits. You brothers, you got habits. You get up in the morning, you notice how you shave. Oh, we start on the same side, unless you say, well, I'm going to start on this other side this morning, see? And you sisters, you got habits, too. You get up in the morning, and you put your faces on and so forth and so on. See, at least 3 times a day, we want to sit down and eat, right? My wife kids me sometimes. She says, well, do you want to eat because you're hungry or just because it's time, see? We don't give it a second thought. It's time to eat, at least 3 times a day. Some of you are laughing. Maybe you're like a brother a few weeks ago. He said, I only eat 1 time a day. All day long. Yeah, that's right. But you ever stop and think about it? We don't give it a second thought. Like if your favorite cook prepares what you like, I don't know what it is, whatever you like, chicken or steak or enchiladas or fettuccine. See, we come in and we smell it, and it smells so good, and we see it, and our mouth waters. What do we say? I don't think I'll eat tonight. You sit down, go to town, see? All right? You don't give it a second. See, it's a good habit that you have. It's a habit. So, so the same thing with meetings. It ought to be a good habit. It's time to go to the public talk and the watchtower study. We get ready and go. It's time to go to the service meeting and the theocratic school. We get ready and go. It's time to go to the book study. We don't say, oh, well, it's just a little meeting. No, it's a meeting that Jehovah is inviting us to go. We get ready and we go. That's interesting, isn't it? It's a habit. In fact, how many of you remember the first make sure of all things that we received? Who remembers that? First make sure. Okay. Does anyone remember the color? What was the color? Who remembers? Sister, what was the color? You remember? Oh, I was looking over here. Excuse me. Good. Okay. Okay, please. Yeah. So you say brown too. All right. One brother a couple of weeks ago told me purple. So, what do you say, sister? A what? Canada. Well, it's like a kind of a rusty brown, isn't it? All right. I guess we're on the same track. All right. Now, what was different about that? Make sure with the one we have now, besides the color. What was different? Please.
Well, one of the things is that make sure that we have now is taken from the Indoor Organization of Violence.
Okay. All right. Now, there was something else different about it, too. Under each subject, you had something. Anyone remember? Sister Manera had a definition. Yes. Who remembers the definition under New World Living? Anyone remember? You don't remember that? I don't expect you to. Okay. Under New World Living, the definition, part of the definition was a daily strengthening of proper habits. Isn't that interesting? A daily strengthening of proper habits. And wouldn't it be important for us to strengthen our habits in meeting attendance? There must have been a time when Peter felt that his relationship with Jehovah was like this one on the left. Remember what Jesus said to Peter? He says, you're going to betray me. Oh, not me, said Peter, not me. He says, all the others might, but not me. See, he's saying or implying that he thought he was better than the others. But you remember what happened. The cock crowed, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. And then it hit him. And he realized what had happened. Don't you imagine that he probably thought his relationship with Jehovah was like this on the left, where he had drifted apart, and his relationship was at the breaking point? But he knew it, and he did something about it. And there's no doubt when he died, his relationship with Jehovah was like the one on the right, wasn't it? Now, maybe when we stop and think about our relationship with God, too, and what we've done about it, maybe it's like the one on the left. And we see, well, I've drifted apart here. I'm not as close to Jehovah as I was. My love's not as strong. All right, we know it. See, we know it. And if we know it, that means we can do something about it. We can work on it. We can strengthen it so that it's like this one on the right. But it's like, again, like 2 people who get married. When 2 people get married, they don't say to each other, well, I love you and I want to marry you, but I'm only going to love you 50% of the time. See, would you go for that? No, of course not. When I was a young man, we used to sing a song, all or nothing at all. Well, now, what about our relationship with Jehovah? See, do we say to Jehovah, Jehovah, I love you and I want to worship you, but I'm only going to worship you 50% of the time? The other 50% I'm going to do what I want? Think Jehovah would go for that? He only accepts exclusive devotion, that's all. So that means we promised that we would give our all. All right, now let's just stop and think. Are we giving our all? What if you could be a pioneer? See, if you could be a pioneer, then really shouldn't you be a pioneer? See, what if you could spend at least 90 hours in the service every month, but you only spend 60? Well, aren't you holding back? What if you could spend 60, but you only spend 20? See, aren't you holding back? What if you could spend 10, but you only spend 2? See, aren't you holding back? What if you could spend 2, but you don't spend any? See, aren't you holding back? We promised Jehovah we'd give our all. You see, and that's really what we want to do. Some might say today with the rising inflation, everything is getting well. I can't afford to pioneer, some might say. But somebody with a different point of view might say, I can't afford not to pioneer. So what are our circumstances? What is our position? What are our scriptural responsibilities? See? And if it's possible for us to pioneer, then we're not going to hold back because we promised Jehovah we would give our all. That's what we want to do, you see. And it's the same thing with our brothers and sisters. When you stop and think about it, when a person gets married, the family grows, doesn't it? Look at what happens in a family relationship like that. You get married, not only do you get a husband and wife, but you see, then you get others, like there's a mother-in-law. Well, I know how people of the world view it, okay? They say, I'm going to inherit an old battle axe or something. You see, but we don't look at it that way. It's a beautiful thing because you get others in that family, mother-in-law, father-in-law, sisters-in-law, brothers-in-law. See, it grows. What a beautiful thing that is. Isn't it true that our relationship with Jehovah, not only does Jehovah come into the picture, but his family comes into the picture. See, and we get brothers and sisters. All kinds of wonderful brothers and sisters. So now we're part of the same family, you see. And that means that we must have love for each other and concern for each other. Well, now, what if one of these brothers offends you? Now what? What are we going to do if somebody offends us, one of our brothers and sisters? Now what do we say? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Please, brother.
Either overlook it, or we'll go to him if it bothers us that much and straighten out.
All right. So, in essence, we're going to do what then? What's another way of putting it? What brother said is right, but what are we going to do? Please. Forgive him. That's right. But now what if he does it again? Forgive him again? Well, how many times are you going to forgive him? How many times are you going to forgive him? Please. Sister, go ahead. Okay. That's what the New World Translation says, 77 times. Well, what do we do? Keep a record. It comes to 77, say, okay, that's your last one. Well, it just means we don't even keep a record, you see. We don't even keep a record. That's what that means. We're willing to forgive. And after all, how could we hold a grudge and say we love Jehovah and have a right relationship with Jehovah? Remember what Jesus said? He said, when you pray, he said, pray, Lord, forgive me for my debts. And what's a debt? It's a sin. See, forgive me for my debts or my sins, the same way as I forgive those who sin against me. See, isn't that what we say? So we say to Jehovah, Jehovah, forgive me the same way as I forgive my brothers and sisters. See, now what if you don't forgive? What if there's just one, just that one brother, and maybe you got a grudge against him for some reason, ill feeling. See? And you know how it is when you've got an ill feeling against someone, don't you? See, your little tummy starts to gnaw inside, and every time you see him, you say, well, there he is again. There he is. There he goes. Look at him. Yeah, look at him. He thinks he's so... See? So you say to Jehovah, Jehovah, forgive me for my sins. Just like... Well, I haven't forgiven, have I, see? So you're saying, Jehovah, forgive me the same way as I, See? Well, we certainly don't want our prayers to mean that. See, we want our prayers to really mean that Jehovah's going to forgive us. But that means we've got to forgive, number one, ourselves. Peter says, love the whole association of the brothers. See, love all of them. He doesn't say love all of them but that one, does he? See, love all of them. How could you hold a grudge? hope to live in Jehovah's New Order. There's not going to be people in the New Order that are going to hold grudges. No. So we have to have good relations with our brothers and sisters, you see. And you know, we talk about, we've been discussing talking. Sometimes I know people say, well, me, I can't talk. You know, I didn't go to a college, or I didn't get any special training. I didn't go to a seminary. I always get those two words somehow mixed up. But you know, have you ever heard people say, I can't talk, and then you start talking about some subject, you know, that they like? You ever have that happen? And then you try to get a word in edgewise, and you can't do it. Little children come home from school with puppy love. They almost drive you crazy talking about the one they think they're in love with. That's puppy love. See, a wife loves her husband, she'll talk about him. A husband loves his wife, he'll talk about her good qualities. If we love Jehovah, we'll talk about him. And no one will stop us from talking, you see. I know sometimes people have picked, like the example of Paul. Now they say well, maybe you've read this in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 10. They say he could write a beautiful letter, but when it came to speaking, it was a different story. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 10, the account says this, for say they, his letters are weighty and forceful. So he could write a beautiful letter, a lot of power. But his presence and person is weak, and his speech contemptible. The Watchtower commented on this, too. Apparently some thought his talks in the congregation could have been more powerful. But, and you know, they pick as an example, to try to make their point and back up what they're saying, they point to the example in the 20th chapter of Acts. Remember, Paul was giving a talk. Plus, he talked way on into the night. But they say the talk got so dry, there was a young man sitting right next to the window. The young man fell fast asleep, fell right out the window, fell down 3 stories, and Paul had to go down there and resurrect him. I'm very thankful you don't have windows in this Kingdom Hall. Well, you know, there's a much better way of looking at that example in the Bible than that, though. See, Paul was visiting that congregation as a representative of the governing body. And that young man probably followed Paul all week long. And Paul probably set a good pace for the congregation. But that young man, he was with Paul all week long. He didn't want to miss a thing. He probably was out in the service with him, made return visits with him, was at all the meetings. And that would be like Sunday night, you know, like when the circuit overseer comes, like Sunday night. And, you know, by then he was so tired he couldn't keep his eyes open. But do you think he'd stay home? Nothing doing. He wanted to hear every word came out of the mouth of the special representative of the governing body. And so he came. Probably got next to the window over there, and, you know, they had a lot of people. They didn't have air conditioning like we have today, and it got warm, you know, and he probably fell asleep, fell right out the window. Paul had to go down there and resurrect him. But you notice he didn't stay home. He came. He was there. And it sets a good example for us. But Paul could talk. In fact, if you ever examine the way Paul did his work, it's quite interesting. He'd come into a town, and he'd give a talk in the synagogue. And he'd split the congregation. See, it would be a Jewish congregation. He split it down the middle, and then he'd start working on those who showed interest, establish a Christian congregation. Now, what if Saturday morning we arranged for you to give a talk in the nearest Jewish synagogue? Do you think you could split it down the middle and start a congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses? That's how he did his work. And Paul had been trained to be a lawyer. In fact, the 8th book mentions he had been trained to be a special kind of lawyer. Does anyone remember the type of lawyer he had been trained to be? Okay, it says he was trained to be an ancestral lawyer. So, you know, he had good training. And so he could talk logically, could convince people, you see. Well, what are results going to be if we do delight to do Jehovah's will? Well, we'll have many opportunities of service, and we'll seize those opportunities, too. It's like a husband says to his wife, honey, would you do this for me, please? And she says, do I have to? And maybe he says, all right, I'll do it. It gets done. All right, Jehovah says, here's a privilege of service. Here's something that needs to be done. What do we say? Do I have to? What happens? Somebody else does it. See, it gets done, and we miss out on the privilege. We miss out on the joy. See, the work gets done, but we miss out. No, if we delight to do Jehovah's will, we're not going to spurn any assignment that would come our way. In fact, we're going to be very, very grateful for that assignment. And you know, when you stop and think about it, we don't have tough assignments anyway. What kind of assignments we have? Study God's Word, be at the meeting, study with our families, be out in the field service. That's not hard. What if you had assignments like Ezekiel? If you want to read about some tough assignments, read chapters 4 and 5 of Ezekiel. Then you'll really read about some assignments. See, Jehovah wanted to foretell the coming destruction of Israel and Judah, And so he used Ezekiel in a living pantomime. He said to Ezekiel, Ezekiel, you go to the gates of the city. And that's where all the people came in and out. It was the busiest spot in town. And he says, you lie down on your left side for 390 days. Now that's over a year. And that's not all he had to do. Jehovah said when you get through lying 390 days on your left side, he said, turn over for 40 on the right side. Can you imagine the commotion he must have caused when he turned over after 390 days? They brought, hey, he turned over on the other side. But that's not all he had to do. Jehovah said as you're laying there, he says, I want you to build little cities and walls and forts. And then he said, take a skillet and set a siege on them. Well, you can imagine what he must have done. Build up these walls and cities in the sand, and then boom, knock them down. Build them up again, boom, knock them down. You can imagine what people must have thought of it there in the sand. Probably said, poor fellow, he lost a few buttons. But that's not all he had to do. Jehovah said, as you're lying there, he says, I want you to bake cake with dung and eat that in front of man to show his defilement. Well, it doesn't say he put the dung in the cake. If you read the New World Translation, it would seem to imply that he used it for fuel, like they use buffalo chips for fuel. See? But nevertheless, he had to do that. And he even told him, now he said, shave all the hair off your face and head, all of it. And he said, divide it into 3 piles. Take one pile, cut it with a knife, take the next one and burn it with fire. And take the third one, throw it up into the wind to show what's going to happen to Israel and Judah. Now, how'd you like to have an assignment like that? See, what if in the middle of the night Jehovah woke you up and said, wake up, wake up. And you wake up, who is it? Who is it? It's Jehovah. Jehovah got an assignment for you. Anything, Jehovah, anything. Okay, starting tomorrow morning. What's that big shopping mall you got over here? What's it called? Cielo Vista? Cielo Vista. Okay, they got a big mall in the side, huh? Okay, what if he says, well, you go over to Cielo Vista, and you find this mall here, and you get right there. Starting tomorrow morning, I want you to go there bright and early, and I want you to lie down on your left side for 390 days. Jehovah, that's over a year, 390 days. 390. All right, Jehovah. Then when you get through, I want you to turn over 40 more on your right. Only 40 on the right side, Jehovah. But while you're lying there, I want you to build up walls and cities and forts and then set a siege on. Build them up, Jehovah, then boom, knock them down. And then I want you to bake cake with dung and eat that in front of Jehovah. Did you say dung, Jehovah? Dung? And I want you to shave all the hair off your face and head. All of it, Jehovah? All of it. Divide into 3 piles. What would you say? Jehovah, I delight to do your will. I'll be there first thing in the morning. Or would you say, Jehovah, please have me excused? Well, see, you don't have an assignment like that. You can be very, very thankful. But you do have an assignment. And what is your assignment? Study God's Word and study it regularly. Study with your family and train your young ones. Be at the meetings. Be there regularly. Be out in the field service as much as we can. And do it regularly. So, brothers and sisters, go back to when you first began your relationship with Jehovah. Remember how good you felt? How thrilled you were when you get up and answered those questions and you stood in the water. You testified to everyone who saw you how you felt about your relationship with Jehovah. And you said, Jehovah, I'm on your side. How good you felt. No one forced you. No one coerced you. Of your own free will, you took that step. How good you felt. Now, what have you done with that relationship with Jehovah? What does it look like? Does it look like this one on the left? Have you drifted apart? Is it at the breaking point? All right, you know it. That means you can do something about it. You can make it like this one on the right. And if yours is like this one on the right, then continue to work at it. So that as each month, each year goes by, that relationship grows stronger and your love for Jehovah God grows warmer. So brothers and sisters, study God's Word, do it regularly. Be out in the field service, be there regularly. Be at the meetings, be there regularly, share regularly, but whatever you do, be sure that you do it with the same words that Jesus had in his heart and his mind. I delight to do your will.
Thank you, Brother Manera. It's obvious we all enjoyed that very much. We have some openings still for the afternoon, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, if you have a Bible study or a return visit, and you'd like Brother Manera, Brother Punko, or their wives, there's openings there. See Brother Baird after the meeting. We have programs for the Circuit Assembly, one per family unit, please. They're in the back, so you can pick those up as you go out. If it's convenient for you and you'd like to stand, we'll be singing song 44, and then we'll ask Brother Punko to give the concluding prayer, please.